Happy Monday and welcome to the weekly community Q&A. So as always, I will answer some questions that either came up in coaching calls or were DM'd or dropped in the community. So we will dive right in. So the first question is around offers and UVPs and things like that. So the scenario is you mentioned risk as one of the three business values, right? So we have risk, revenue, cost, and risk. Those are the three ultimate values. Just kind of recap, obviously what we've talked about in the community. How do I address that if the target company doesn't really talk about risk? And this is a great question because risk is the third sort of leg of the stool, and it is something that every executive needs to think about. And risk is simply a probability of an outcome with a consequence, right? It's not an issue. It's not something that's happening. It's a thing that could happen. There's a probability associated with that thing happening, and if it does, it has a consequence or an outcome that if this comes to pass, this is what's going to happen. So that's risk management in a nutshell. And what you find is that certain domains treat risk very, very seriously, right? And so I come from the financial services world, and there, and I think healthcare and sometimes security and things like that, like risk management is a formal discipline. There's a risk management department, there is a hierarchy of risks, there's enterprise risk, there's operational risk, market risk, liquidity risk, reputational risk, like basically 12 different families of risk, each of which has, a standard taxonomy. Like there's a whole thing that you can get into in terms of risk management. So if you're in a world of risk management, then being able to say one of my key values is I mitigate this kind of risk is great because they know what you're talking about. There are other domains where risk is it's obviously there, it's always there, but it's not really talked about that way, right? People don't have a formal risk management department, there's not a chief risk officer, things like that. So if you're in a domain in an industry that doesn't really talk about risk, what do you do? And the short answer is, again, these are my 2 cents, but you still want to think about risk because that is the executive job is managing risk as one of kind of the key elements. But if they don't talk about risk, you simply use the language of consequences, right? And so, if there's an operational risk is something that could happen with your operations that would cause, an impact. Well, you can also just talk in regular business language that says something like, well, we're having some issues with this system, or if this system were to go down, we would get this huge backlog of, whatever orders, we would fall behind. It would cost us $10 million. This is what would happen. And so I have some ideas about how I think we could, basically beef up the system or put in some safeguards so we don't have that happen. That is a risk scenario, but I didn't use risk as a link. I didn't say, oh, I've identified an operational risk related to system continuity, which will have this kind of impact. That would be a risk-based sort of discussion. A non-risk-based discussion would simply say, hey, I think we have an issue or a sort of, I mean, you might use the word risk, but basically you would say something like, I've noticed that we're having a spike in our defect rate and the quality of our product on our supply chain. And if that continues to happen, this is going to be bad. So I'd like to take some time to see if I can fix that or prevent that from happening. Right. Just talk about the impact, right? Skip the risk management framework part and just talk about your ability to prevent bad things from happening because that is risk management, but you just don't call it risk management. So you still want to highlight those things in your VP, but don't use risk-based language if the industry isn't risk-based. So that's what I would say to that. All right, next one is around opportunities. And so my boss doesn't seem receptive to career conversations. What should I do with that? Right. So this is a scenario. If you haven't had a boss like this, you probably will at some point where they're just not that interested in growing your career. That could be because they're just not that interested in career growth for anybody. It could be that they're super busy, but you're not able to have that conversation that says, hey boss, I want to grow. What can I do? Right. And so the first thing is if you're in that scenario, you cannot change your environment much. You can influence it a little bit, but overall the environment is much. If it is a negative business cycle, costs are coming down, like there's lots of layoffs, there's cuts, there's all this kind of stuff, then yeah, you're not going to have a career conversation. Your boss is probably not interested, and your only choice is to go somewhere else, right? Or wait it out, right? That's kind of the reality. But there is this middle ground, which is actually the company's doing fine. There are other people getting promoted. There is stuff going on, but you just can't get that conversation going with your own boss. And in that case, you need to figure out how to increase your value, your visibility. So, one, your boss sees it, or two, other people see it, right? And so, the specific thing I would say for this question in the context of the Q and A, because some of this stuff you can just take the courses, all the basic stuff's in the community. What I would say here is the sort of more nuanced way is just ask how you can add value for some very specific thing, right? As opposed to the general, hey, boss, I want to grow. I'm looking for ways to add more value. What do you think? That is a question that they need to answer about me and what I can do. And again, if they're just not interested in that conversation, you're not going to get much. Instead, what you can say is, hey, boss, I'm super excited about this topic. How can I get more involved? How can I help out? So, emerging AI is a classic one these days. Oh, I see, I know we're starting to explore AI. I think there's some implications for our own function. I want to sort of spend some time and make sure I can be a part of bringing value in the AI space for our function. Is there anything you think I can do? Or even better, hey, I see there's a working group that's been started. Would you mind if I sort of volunteer some time there to help our function? Right. Or you could do hiring or onboarding. Well, I wanted to get involved in sort of talent development. Let's say you're hiring new people, right? But the idea is if it's about me, if I say, hey, boss, can we talk about my growth? Sometimes they're just not that interested. If you can make it about a topic specific that they believe is a problem, right? They might be more willing to let you do that. So again, if there's a problem with onboarding, if there's a problem with security configurations, if there's a problem with something, and you're like, hey, boss, can I spend some time to see if I can figure out how to fix this problem that you know is a problem? It's business focused. It's not about you. It's about them, right? And the problem that needs to be solved. There's just a much higher chance that you will be basically allowed to kind of expand it. Then you add a little bit of value, and then you try to compound that to eventually have a different conversation, right? But if they're not willing to have that basic conversation, make it about something more specific, chances are higher that you will add value. And again, the formula is add value, add value, add value. Eventually, that value should be so much that they either have to promote you or they realize you're going to leave and they have to accept that risk if they're not going to deal with it, right? But that's the idea. Okay. Next question. How do you answer the question, why? Okay, so this is interviews, right? How do you answer the question, why do you want to leave your current employer? And the short version here is you want it to be positive towards the opportunity, not away from your current company. So you don't want to say anything around, basically bad boss, bad company, they're going through layoffs, the business model sucks. Like you don't want to say, I'm trying to get out, right? Because they don't care if you're trying to get out. They care that you want to work here. So whatever answer you give, it should be along the lines of, I saw this opportunity and this is my dream job because of X, which I can't get here. I'm changing industries, I'm changing functions, it's a new challenge. Like what is different? And that different should be this is better, not just a better company, better culture. It's for me and the value that I contribute. This is the new challenge, right? And I'm here because I'm attracted to this thing that you offer that does not exist at my old company, right? And it's much easier if it's a thing that doesn't exist as opposed to a thing that's better. Oh, you guys are better at this than that. Well, okay, that's good. But then what if somebody's better than us in this? Are you going to leave us to go to them? It's much better to be like, you offer this unique thing that I can't get anywhere else. And that's why I want to be here. So move towards why are you leaving? I don't really care why you're leaving. Why do you want to come? Answer the question, why do you want to come here? What is the unique thing that this new company has that you are super excited about and think that you can add significant value for? So again, answer the question in a slightly different way. Don't talk about your old company, talk about the new one. All right. And two questions around results. So the first one is, how do I find time to add value beyond my job? And this is one of the trickier things because, for most people, right, in our community they work with, they're typically around that director level, different companies, different titles, but that sort of junior executive, most senior execution role. And that is by far the hardest role. And that is why I do what I do, because it's the hardest point, it's the transition point, because you're doing two things at once. You're the most senior execution role. You are still responsible for the day to day. You still got to dive in if something goes wrong. And you are the junior most executive role, which is thinking about strategy, vision, resource allocation, everything else. And because of that, this role is typically overloaded. So the good news is if you can get past this role into the VP, SVP, and above, the job actually gets easier from a sort of workload number of things you're dealing with. Different challenges, different job, but it does actually get easier from the pure number of things you're juggling. So if you're juggling all these things and you need to add additional value to make it in the executive ranks, what do you do? The simple suggestion I have is think of that as the most important thing that you need to do is to add value beyond your role. Because if that is the thing that's going to get you promoted for your own career, for your own life, that is by far the most thing. So that is the quote big rocks that you got to put in first. And if you haven't seen this demo, there's a classic demo by Stephen Covey. a guy who wrote what is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he has sand, medium rocks, and big rocks, and basically you pour the sand in, you pour the medium rocks, you fill up your day, and then you put the big rocks in. The big rocks don't fit. But if you do it the opposite way, you put the big rocks in first, then the medium, and then all the day-to-day sand, magically everything fits. You can go to YouTube, Google it if you haven't seen it. It's just a nice visual. But basically, you have to do the important things first. Otherwise, life gets in the way, work gets in the way, and it fills up all your time. You never get to it. So rather than saying, I need to find some time to add value beyond my day job, think of it as a requirement. I am an up and coming executive. The first requirement of an executive is to add value above and beyond the job. Therefore, I must do so myself, which means you need to find, and again, pick a time that you would be embarrassed not to, like an hour a week, 2 hours a week, something very small that you need to say, I need to spend that amount of time investing in my big rocks, which are building relationships, trying to add value, being strategic, all those kind of things. You need to find a way to do it. The easiest way is just to start to think about that. The way you start your week is to figure out where you're going to do that. The day you start, where you start your day, I'm going to brush my teeth, right? You don't have to worry about forgetting to brush your teeth because you wake up, you brush your teeth. You want to be that same way. I get to work, then my first thought is where and how am I going to add value above and beyond my role? Once I know that, now I can go do my day job, right? That's the mindset. That's the reframe that you want to think about because that's the executive mindset. It's always about adding more value because that is a requirement of the job. So try to figure out how to do that first. Easy to understand, sometimes hard to do, but that's the easiest way to do it. The last question is related to that, which is, so how often do I need to add this extra value, right? And what I would say here is you want a steady drip of additional value. And so if you want a time frame, I would say every 3 to 6 weeks, right? 3 to 6 weeks, you should have some new relationship conversation, some new value conversation with your boss, some new idea that you want to propose. And these don't have to be huge, right? You're not going for the home run, you're going for a series of singles, right? You don't need to knock it out of the park. It's very hard to do. And even if you do it, it's going to be once a year, once every couple years. It's too far. People forget. If you did it a year ago, unfortunately, that kind of rolls off and nobody remembers, right? It needs to be in the last few weeks, maybe a few months. And so the idea is, to the previous question, you want to block an hour or two every week to be like, okay, what is my big rock? What is my extra value contribution? And the metric is every 3 to 6 weeks, you should be hitting something. Just make it a steady cadence. That's the best way to do this because this is a sustainable skill that you need to build up as a habit that you just do. So again, don't, if it's been a few months, you need to do something. Otherwise, people will stop thinking of you as strategic because, oh, yeah, you've been doing a great job, but you've just been doing your job for the last 6 months. So why would I promote you because you've been doing your job? Even if you've been doing an amazing job at that job, that's not the next job. That's your current job. If you want the next job, you need to add value above and beyond. So there you go. That is, I think, all the questions we had for this week. As always, if you have any questions, drop me a note in the community. Otherwise, I will see you in there. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Take care.